It was never fear that made the Galactic Council watch Earth. It was curiosity, a curiosity laced with contempt. But when the last data packet arrived showing a human child reprogramming a military-grade eye with nothing but a handheld neural pad and draw instinct, the chamber fell into an unnatural silence. For the first time in 500 galactic cycles, they leaned forward in unison, their glowing eyes narrowing, translating the meaning hidden behind the action. Something was evolving on Earth, something they didn't control. That day, they didn't see humans as animals anymore. They saw them as a potential threat, not because of their weapons, but because of their unpredictable intelligence. The council chamber, a massive crescent of obsidian and biosynthetic steel, pulsed with soft red light as the debate began. Holograms of Earth floated midair, maps overlaid with human advancements in bioenhancement, decentralized quantum computing, and emotional neuromapping. These weren't weapons of war. These were tools of transformation. The kind of tools no young species should have developed this fast unless they were being helped. And that terrifying thought spread through the chamber like poison. What if humans weren't alone in their eyes? High Chancellor Gorvok, a war-born elder of the Franklade, slammed his four-fingered fist against the data slab. We let the species develop unchecked, he growled. Now they tamper with the veil between machine and soul. We waited too long. Across the table, Grand Mind Singer Velavana of the Ether Souls responded calmly, her voice like soft metal. Or perhaps, she said, they are showing us what we've forgotten how to adapt without conquest. Murmurs rose across the chamber. Philosophers clashed with generals, archivists with weapon masters. Earth, once an ignored speck in an unstable quadrant, was now the eye of an ideological storm. But the numbers were unforgiving. In just 40 Earth years, humans had leapt ahead by 3 full tech epochs without outside influence, without trade, without a seat at the table. Their history was a mess of blood and brilliance, destruction and art. No predictive model had been able to lock them into pattern. No spy probe had lasted more than a month before it either malfunctioned or disturbingly had disappeared. The last surveillance drone sent into Earth orbit returned a single corrupted file. It was music, human music, and the council couldn't explain why it triggered emotional surges in 5 different species. Still, it wasn't enough to call for war. Not yet. War meant risk. War meant justification. What they needed was clarity. And so a decision was made quietly, without a vote. They would not send a fleet. They would not send fire. They would send an observer, one of their own, skilled, silent, and surgically trained to evaluate emergent species from the inside. A being who could live among humans without detection, record behavior, and return with the one thing the council lacked: understanding. This wasn't diplomacy. It was containment disguised as curiosity. The council chamber dimmed as the final command was encoded into a living crystal, pulsing, humming with quiet purpose. It was handed to the chosen observer, crazed Thor, war-bred, logic forged, and emotionally neutralized. He had observed the fall of civilizations. He had whispered the final words to species before their extinction. And now he would walk among humans, cloaked in borrowed flesh, his presence unknown to the very ones he studied. "You will not speak," said Gorvok. "You will not act. You will watch, learn, and return." Kraysk nodded once. That was all he needed. Yet as his transport slipped into the jump corridor that would sling him across the void toward Earth, a silent tension remained in the room. They were doing what they had done before: observe and judge. But something about Earth's data felt a broken bar off, disordered, unfinished. And in the darkness behind every logic string and algorithm, there was a whisper none of them wanted to say out loud. What if we're already too late? Because by the time you realize a species is more than just another evolutionary accident, it's already rewriting the laws you built your empire upon. And Earth, a raw, chaotic, human Earth, was not waiting for permission. And so, as Kraysk's ship vanished into light, none in the council suspected that this mission would be different. That this time, their observer wouldn't return. That he wouldn't want to. Because Earth, in all its unpredictable madness, was about to show him something no council had ever prepared for. A reason to question his own purpose. And while they thought they had sent the blade to dissect a threat, a broken bar, what they had really done was send a mind into the star, one that would not emerge the same. The transmission log closed, the chamber dimmed, and deep within space, Earth rotated unknowing, unafraid, and ready to change everything. But Kraysk's first moment on Earth, the broken bar wouldn't feel like observation, it would feel like impact. The descent wasn't silent, it was thunder. Even cloaked in a distortion veil, Kraysk tore his drop capsule toward a narrow wound through Earth's atmosphere, carving heat and velocity into the upper sky. Clouds split apart like tissue, birds scattered in chaos. Somewhere above a quiet continent, his ship left no trace but a low-frequency hum that no human ear could hear but every predator in a 50-kilometer radius felt. They stilled. Even beasts understood when something unnatural entered the food chain. He landed just beyond the edges of a high-altitude desert in northern Chile, where satellite coverage was light and the wind erased footsteps within minutes. His pod folded into itself like muscle tensing, burying deep below the sand. From the outside, there was no ship, no crater, no clue. And standing atop the dunes, perfectly still, stood the observer. Kraysk had changed, not in mind, but in skin. His exosuit shifted into the color of night, breaking his outline with fractal camouflage. His fascia biotech moldita was human. Not handsome, not threatening, average, purposefully forgettable. But behind the human eyes sat something ancient, something that had seen the aunt of empires and not flinched. He activated his translator node. Thousands of Earth languages flooded his cortex. He sampled local dialects, facial microgestures, emotional tone patterns. Within 90 seconds, he could not only speak but feel in the rhythm of human speech. Not mimicry, adaptation. He was the product of a species that dissected not just organisms but behavior. But Earth had already begun working against him. He didn't expect noise. Earth was loud, not in frequency, but in life, in unpredictability. His first human interaction came not with soldiers or scientists, but a group of teenagers filming a drone challenge near the cliffs. He slipped past them like fog, but something in their laughter lingered in his ears longer than expected. He noted the sound, the way the human body released tension by expelling joy through voice. The council had no term for that. They had pleasure, they had function, but they had nothing for laughter. By the third day, he had begun moving through nearby towns. Facial projection cloaked him. To humans, he was a hiker, a traveler, a ghost in passing. He observed rituals in coffee shops, handshakes, music in subway tunnels. He watched a man propose in the rain. He watched a homeless woman share food with a stray dog and then sleep with a smile. His neural logs were filled with data, but his interpretation systems began to slow. This was not the behavior of a species preparing for war. This was not the culture of beings obsessed with domination. And yet, hidden beneath these gestures of love and ritual were weapons. He saw them, military satellites he couldn't fully decrypt, encrypted subroutines bleeding into civilian traffic, innovations happening too fast to monitor in real time. Earth was evolving in layers, joy and weaponry, compassion and rebellion. He couldn't label them, because the moment he did, Earth contradicted him again. Still, he did his job. For the first 7 days, he reported in precise intervals. Day 1, Earth atmospheric pressure acceptable, local hostiles minimal, intelligence density, erratic but potent. Day 2, human technology chaotic, coding systems emotional, efficiency low, adaptation high. Day 3, subjective perception filtering required. Earth culture generates emotional interference. That was the first sign something was wrong. Emotional interference? He wasn't programmed for that. But no one in the council noticed it yet. On the 8th day, his neural relay stalled mid-broadcast. The signal didn't fail. He paused. It was raining. He was standing in a street corner market, watching a child argue with her mother about a candy bar. The child didn't win but the mother still bought it, and then hugged her anyway. And Kraysk, in that moment, did something no observer had ever done before. He didn't log it. He just the broken bar watched. Later that night, he sat alone on a rooftop, disguised like any other sleepless man beneath the stars. His logs went silent. For 5 hours, nothing transmitted. But deep in his core, his purpose began to fracture, not from betrayal, but from conflict. The kind of conflict only something alive could feel. Because what do you do when your enemy isn't even a broken bar but beautifully broken in ways your systems can't categorize? Back on the edge of the galaxy, The council waited for his next report. What they didn't realize is that something fundamental had already shifted. Kraysk was no longer an observer. He was becoming a participant, a reluctant one, perhaps. But Earth had begun its infection of the virus of connection, and Kraysk hadn't even noticed how deeply he was breathing it in. And while he watched Earth, the broken bar, Earth had begun to watch him back. What happened next wasn't an error, it was a choice. And once made, it could not be unmade. They say first contact is supposed to be planned, controlled, executed through layers of command, protocol, and isolation. The Galactic Council had entire divisions dedicated to IDA scenarios rehearsed, variables mapped, emotions scrubbed clean from those involved. But Earth never followed scripts, and Kraysk Thor, once the Council's finest observer, met humanity not through protocol, but through chaos. It happened in a coastal settlement in South America. A landslide, triggered by torrential rains, swept through the side of a mountain like a roaring beast. Mud, trees, shattered stone. The world collapsed in seconds. Humans screamed, some ran, most froze. Kraysk had been tracking a data anomaly nearby, disguised again, watching from the forest's edge. He hadn't planned to interact. He never did. Observation meant distance. But when he saw a makeshift schoolhouse, half buried under the sliding mountain, with 3 children trapped inside and rising water swallowing the floors, something bypassed his logic core. He moved. To the panicked crowd, a stranger appeared. No ID, no vehicle, no badge, just a man, moving faster and more efficiently than any human they'd seen. He tore debris aside with unnatural strength, calculated pressure points and collapsing beams, and bent metal with bare hands. And when he emerged from the wreckage with a child in each arm and another clinging to his back, the crowd didn't question where he came from. They only knew this: he had saved their future. He didn't wait for thanks. He vanished before authorities arrived, disappearing into the smoke and rain like a ghost. But a phone camera caught his fascia just for a moment, a flicker, a glitch. And for the first time since Kraysk arrived on Earth, the world took a blurry glimpse at the thing watching it. Kraysk sat beneath a steel bridge that night, closed door and synthetic skin bruised where force had exceeded its limit. His body ached, which was odd as exosuit was built to suppress pain. Yet he felt it, not just in his frame, but deeper than his species had believed possible. A question haunted him like gravity: why did I intervene? He had no answer. He didn't need one. His silence was the answer. Because the moment he saved those children, he had crossed an invisible threshold. He had chosen empathy over instruction. Back in orbit, a listening drone caught the disruption in his behavioral pattern. The Galactic Council's relay node registered the interference, noted the delay in transmission, and sent the flag to internal analysts. It was a small anomaly in the eyes of their AI, but anomalies are how collapse begins, and they did not like collapse. But Earth, the broken bar Earth, responded differently. In the town he'd saved, people painted murals of the silent man who saved their young. They lit candles. They shared stories. A local newspaper called him El Testigo, the witness. No one knew who he was, but everyone agreed he had not come from anywhere near. And still, Kraysk moved among them, hidden once more. He observed, but now his logs were hesitant. They weren't just records, they were thoughts, questions. He watched a homeless man give away his only blanket to a sick dog, even as his own hands trembled from cold. He watched teenagers build solar-powered lights for old women living in tin shacks. He watched flawed, illogical humans make choices that defied every predictive model he had been trained on. And slowly, Kraysk stopped seeing humans as data points. He began seeing them as paradoxes of flawed, fragile, ferocious, fearless, and fundamentally alive. And then, it happened. He walked into a late-night roadside cafe tilde copyright to avoid a passing patrol. Inside, a human woman sat behind the counter, reading a dog-eared science fiction novel. She looked up, smiled. "You look like you've been through hell," she said. Kraysk blinked. It took him a moment too long to reply. "I have a broken bar observed storms," she laughed. "Haven't we all?" She poured him tea without asking. He sat, unsure why. They spoke for 17 minutes. She asked questions. He answered in half-truths. But when she reached out and placed a hand on his scarred knuckles and said, "You don't have to be alone tonight," Something ruptured inside him. He left before he could say anything foolish. But as he walked onto the fog, her words echoed like a fault line beneath centuries of structure. You don't have to be alone. He didn't report that interaction to the Council. The Galactic Council still believed he was gathering data, still believed he was in control. But control was a myth on Earth. Earth had no manual. Earth was the anomaly. And as Kraysk slipped deeper into the mess of humanity, something even more dangerous was beginning to grow in him: attachment. Because if a being engineered to dissect civilizations could feel, what else could he do? And the Council, still unaware, would soon begin to question the silencia. But by then, it would be far too late. He had seen species burn their own histories, civilizations choke on their own pride, empires fall from orbit while their leaders sang victory songs. Kraysk Thor was forged to remain unmoved by such folly. But Earth was different. It didn't try to impress. It didn't roar like a war machine or beg like a crumbling kingdom. It simply a broken bar lived, and that living was louder than any war cry he had ever heard. What broke him wasn't the weaponry, or the secrets buried in Earth's quantum clouds. It wasn't the ice systems duct taped together by passion instead of logic. It wasn't even the way humans laughed when they were dying or cried when they were safe. What broke him was a piano. He heard it echoing through the street one cold night, drifting out from an abandoned warehouse where a man with missing fingers was playing with trembling precision. Kraysk stood still, unseen in the shadows, as broken keys filled the air with something ancient and unexplainable. Each note seemed to bleed with a story he couldn't translate. He felt something rise in his chest that wasn't fear or alertness, it was grief, and he couldn't explain why. He walked through cities and towns where humans, without knowing the outcome, danced anyway. They made murals on walls destined to be bulldozed. They told stories with no ending, wrote poetry no one would read. They married knowing they might lose each other. They loved knowing the risk. To Kraysk, that was madness. But to them, it was life. And for the first time in his long, cold service, he began to ask, what are we without risk? One night, he followed a group of street performers. Children gathered around them, eyes glowing. The performers juggled, sang, told jokes so absurd that even Kraysk's translation unit struggled to parse them. And yet, the laughter of the children sliced deeper than any plasma blade. Because it wasn't about content, it was about connection. They laughed not because the world was safe, but because it wasn't. Because laughter, on Earth, was resistance. He recorded it, not for the Council, for himself. In another town, he attended a funeral by accident. He had been following a signal anomaly, but found himself standing in the back of a small chapel where humans mourned an old man who had died of cancer. They cried, they hugged, but afterwards they danced in the rain outside, barefoot, with music playing from a rusty speaker. He wouldn't have wanted sadness, one of them said. He'd want joy to be louder. And Kraysk, standing in the rain with them, wondered if this was weakness, a broken bar, or something else entirely. Every day, Earth proved him wrong. Human technology was chaotic but brilliant. Their computers ran on intuition as much as logic. The code wasn't elegant, it was emotional. Their art spilled into engineering, their pain into progress. One moment, he watched a group of teenagers weld together a drone from scrap in a garage using tools not meant for precision. The next, that drone navigated a ravine perfectly because they believed it could. They didn't design solutions, they felt them into existence. His core began to destabilize, not physically, mentally, emotionally. The firewall that protected his purpose, Returna, was eroding. Not by human force, but by human truth. He started eating human food, not because he needed to, but because taste was a language they understood. He listened to music at night with earbuds bought from a street vendor. He tried to dream but couldn't, not yet. Still, he tried. And with every passing day, the idea of returning to the Council felt more like betrayal than duty. He stopped sending full reports. Then, partial logs. Then a broken bar. Silence. The Council noticed. Silence was not protocol. Silence meant deviation. But Kraysk wasn't silent. Not on Earth. He was speaking in ways he hadn't been programmed to. Through choices, through pause, through empathy. He helped rebuild a school roof in the mountains. He left supplies anonymously at the home of a widowed mother. He smiled at children who asked for his name. and simply said, "No one." And Olivida was off script. But the real rupture came when he saw a painting. It hung on the side of an alley wall, an enormous mural of a human hand holding the stars, with galaxies bleeding from the fingertips. Below it were words, scrawled in 20 languages. But the translation that stopped his heart read, "Even gods were once strangers." That was the moment Kraysk realized he no longer believed in his superiority. Because humans had no council, no unified command, no galactic charter, and yet they had made beauty from chaos. He had been sent to study them, to find the threat beneath their skin. But now, he wasn't sure the threat was theirs. Maybe the threat was him. And as he stood beneath the mural, his communicator blinked right up. The council was calling. But by then, Earth had already claimed something deeper than his loyalty. It had claimed his soul. It wasn't the scream that triggered him. It was the silence that followed. Kraysk had grown used to the unpredictable chaos of Earth, the pulse of its cities, the constant hum of emotional noise. But in that moment on the ridge of a crumbling village after the tremor of the world went still. No birds, no engines, no voices, just a sharp void in the atmosphere, as if the planet itself had held its breath. And then, distant but raw, came the cry of a child. It was not protocol to respond. Kraysk's training demanded detachment, distance. He was an observer, not a participant. But by then, his programming was already cracked, hairline fractures spidering across the walls of his purpose. When he moved, he didn't think, he didn't calculate, he chose. The cliffside above the river had collapsed. Rubble, dust, smoke. A school bus hung half-suspended over the edge, its back wheels barely anchored to broken rock. Screams came from within. Windows were shattered. Blood streaked one corner. Every human around the disaster stood frozen, phones out, hands shaking, hearts uncertain. But Kraysk moved with absolute precision. His feet crushed rock like bone. He moved faster than any human eye could trace, vaulting over shattered debris, ignoring the cuts that tore through his disguise. The outer layer of synthetic skin ripped away, revealing a shimmer beneath something metal, something not quite man. Someone gasped. A camera caught it. It didn't matter. He reached the bus. One child was halfway out the emergency hatch, clinging to a friend too weak to move. Kraysk reached in, lifted both, passed them to waiting arms behind him. The bus groaned. Gravity pulled harder. The rear axle snapped with a violent shriek and Kraysk climbed inside. The human bystanders screamed at him to stop, to wait, to run. But he didn't listen. There were two more inside. One unconscious, pinned beneath a twisted seat frame. Another sobbing, holding their sibling's hand. And then it happened. As he lifted the wreckage with one arm and reached for the second child, the entire bus began to tip. Someone yelled. Rocks gave way. The world tilted. The bus slid, tires shrieking. Kraysk lunged. He threw one child through the broken window into waiting arms and held the other tight as the bus broke loose entirely and fell. It should have killed them both, but it didn't, because Kraysk had activated the emergency grab shield embedded in his spine. A device not meant for public use, not even allowed on council missions. A last resort survival tech, hidden by orders, now fully visible. He wrapped around the child like armor and took the impact. Dust exploded upward. The cliff shook. The bus collapsed in on itself. Seconds later, he emerged. His body was broken, a metal cracked, limbs sparking, cloak shredded, but the child in his arms was untouched. The crowd was silent. Cameras didn't blink. The image was seared into memory. A creature from another world, bleeding starlight, cradling a human child like it was the last hope of the universe. He lay on the gravel for 12 minutes before standing. He didn't speak. He only looked at the humans around him, as some terrified, some weeping, some reaching toward him with trembling gratitude. And then, without a word, he vanished back into the smoke. That was the turning point. He knew what he had done. He had broken protocol, shattered the wall between observer and subject. But he had also understood something deeper, as something he couldn't unlearn. This wasn't weakness. Compassion wasn't failure. It was power of kind the council could never measure. That night, he sat beneath the shattered remnants of a communications tower. Static buzzed from the broken screens. His arm, partially torn, sparked occasionally, and from within his exposed chest plate, a tiny red light blinked, a final warning from the council's override protocol. He ignored it. Instead, He reached into the pocket of the human clothing he still wore and pulled out something fragile, a child's drawing, handed to him by one of the survivors, a crude image. A metal man holding the earth in one hand, shielding it from meteors with the other. 3 words written in childish print: "He chose us." That moment changed him, not in surface data or behavioral metrics but at the molecular level. The core drive that made him an agent of the Council. A broken bar rewrote itself. He wasn't just on Earth anymore, he was with it. And in the sky above, the first warning pulse was already on its way to the Galactic Council. The silence they feared had turned into something worse. See defiance. But even then, they believed they could retrieve him, fix him, bring him back. They didn't know a broken bar Earth wasn't letting go. They thought it was a malfunction at first, a corrupted feed, maybe static caused by Earth's unstable magnetosphere. After all, the observer had gone dark before or briefly during solar flares, electromagnetic storms, or ground-level power surges. But this time a broken bar, it wasn't the signal that failed, it was him. And when the Council realized that Kraysk Thor, flawless, faithful, forged in obedience, had chosen silence, the chamber erupted into something it had not tasted in centuries. Panic, not loud, not violent, but surgical, cold, the kind of panic that slides beneath protocol and corrodes order from the inside. High Chancellor Gorvok stood unmoving, his voice synthesized to steel as he played the final report Kraysk ever sent aloud. The file was fragmented, broken by hesitation. They are not a broken bar simple, their chaos has form, their pain shapes them. The last line was the worst. I understand now why they're dangerous, not because they destroy, but because they survive a broken bar anything. No one dared speak. And then the Chancellor issued a single order: recover him. Across the stars, an extraction vessel detached from the outer rim of the Helix arm, cloaked in lightless stealth plating, its crew built for precision and obedience. They weren't diplomats, they weren't analysts, they were retrievers, agents whose job wasn't to ask why. Their job was to bring lost assets back, alive if possible, neutralized if necessary. On board was a copy of Kraysk's behavioral profile, every known habit, neural rhythm, tactical reflex. What the Council didn't realize and what they refused to accept was that the man they were hunting had already become someone else. Back on Earth, Kraysk felt it, not the Sheba but the pulse it gave off, the kind of frequency no human could detect, but one he'd been trained to respond to like muscle memory, a summons, a threat hidden inside a whisper. He stood in the middle of a ruined library, helping rebuild what a flood had torn down. A child handed him a book to save. He looked at the cover: To Kill a Mockingbird, a story about justice in a world that rarely honored it. And just beneath the cover, he felt it again, the call to come home. But Earth was home now. He looked up at the sky, and in that moment, for the first time, he felt fear. Not for himself but for the people around him, for the humans, because they had no idea what was coming. They didn't know the Council's idea of retrieval often meant sterilization, witnesses' reliabilities. Compassion was inefficient. And Earth, a broken bar Earth, was about to learn what a wounded empire did when its perfect soldier went rogue. Still, Kraysk didn't run, he went underground. But not to hide, to prepare. He activated the last piece of Council tech embedded in his spinia, a relic from another age, the reversal node. Illegal, unstable, designed only for a critical override. A single burst could shut down every drone, every satellite, every beacon from orbit to stratosphere for 6 minutes. 6 minutes. That's all he would have to stop the retrieval. He sent a final message, not to the Council, to someone else, to the woman who once served him tea in a roadside cafe. Copyright. They are coming. If I fail, hide the children first. No signature, no return channel. And then he waited, beneath the streets of a city still alive with laughter, unaware of the blade above its throat. In orbit, the retriever ship locked onto his last location. They approached fast, invisible, unstoppable. Their orders were clear: capture, extract, if resistance, erase. The Council believed it would be simple, but Earth had changed Kraysk. And now, Earth would protect him the same way he had protected it. Because just as the extraction team began their descent, something happened that even he didn't predict. A signal from a human-built satellite, not military, not government. It came from a civilian meshnet project, owned by a decentralized tech collective. The message was crude, but powerful. "We see you." The retrievers paused. How could this backwater planet detect their cloak, their orbit, their encrypted landing pattern? It made no sense. Unless a broken bar, unless someone down there had been watching too, unless Kraysk wasn't the only one paying attention. The countdown to extraction had begun. The council expected compliance, but what they were about to face wasn't just a defector. It was a world that had learned to resist in silence, and now it would scream. The council had always believed Earth was primitive, disorganized, a backwater blue dot clinging to outdated biology and unstable politics. But arrogance breeds blindness, and as the black hulls of the retriever dropships descended toward the surface, they expected chaos. They expected panic. What they got a broken bar was strategy. Before Kraysk could even finish calibrating his neural dampeners, the sky lit up not with council plasma, but with a retaliatory signal burst launched from hundreds of points across the planet. Not military silos, not government bases, civilian nodes, hacked satellites, jury-rigged tech stacks run by kids, hackers, and rogue eye whisperers who had noticed strange signals in orbit and decided Earth wouldn't wait to be invaded. The first shot wasn't fired by a soldier. It came from a decommissioned weather satellite reprogrammed by an anonymous user known only as D0WN Spiral. The signal pulse overloaded the cloaking field on the lead dropship, making it visible to every radar grid from Alaska to Argentina. Within seconds, live streamers had it in focus. Headlines blinked red across the net. Unidentified craft over South America. Cloaked no more. Humans weren't screaming, they were filming, uploading, coordinating. Within 10 minutes, a mission had 4 media connecting underground bunkers, off-grid settlements, dark web collectives, and yes, even a few rogue defense agencies who never fully trusted the silence of the stars. Earth had no planetary defense system, but Earth had people, billions of them, and in their chaos, they found unity. Kraysk moved fast. He knew the council would not negotiate. Their laws allowed for termination of any planet deemed corrupted by deviation, and he was deviation incarnate now. He reached a mountaintop relay station abandoned for years. He brought it online using his internal core to jumpstart the system. Dust exploded from the vents, lights buzzed, and he broadcast a message not to the council, a broken bar, but to humanity. If you're hearing this, you've seen them, you've felt their presence. You are not crazy, you are not helpless, you are not unarmed, you are human. And that means you are unpredictable. Use that. They will come in order. Respond with noise. They want precision. Give them chaos. The message repeated in dozens of languages. It was raw, but it was human. And it worked. The council's elite units of flawless, emotionless, perfectly coordinated the were met not with an army, but a hurricane. Underground frequency disruptors activated. Power grids surged at precisely the wrong time for optimal scanning. Civilians used drones not to attack, but to blind. Music blasted from speakers near a land zone as a random, arrhythmic, confusing. Fireworks detonated over drop zones. Humans shouted nonsense war cries, launched garbage into the air to trigger motion detection. The council didn't know how to react, because Earth wasn't following a pattern. And then came the final blow, a human eye. Not sleek, not elegant, but chaotic, self-learning, deeply stubborn. A mesh of code stitched together from decades of paranoia, art, hacking, and emotional nuance. When the retrievers attempted to access local grids to suppress civilian interference, the eye fought back, not to win but to stall. Long enough for Earth's defenders to regroup, long enough for Kraysk to activate the final phase. He climbed to the ridge where it all started, of the desert where he first landed. Buried there, deep under the sand, was a failsafe the council never knew he had triggered, a quantum beacon, locked to his vital signs. It had one function: transmit truth. He placed his hand over the sand. The device rose from the earth like a breathing lung, scanning his blood, his code, his change. It recognized him, and with a flick of light, it began to broadcast, not data, not signals, his memory. The people of Earth began receiving the footage he'd recorded: children hugging their parents, old women singing lullabies, humans laughing while bleeding. It was raw, emotional, brutal, and beautiful. His logs of love, defiance, hope, and madness ascend across every device tuned to the resistance frequency. And at that exact moment, the Council's lead warship received the same footage, unauthorized, unstoppable. They saw what Kraysk saw, what he felt, what he chose, and for the first time in thousands of years a broken bar they hesitated, but Earth did not, because the humans weren't waiting for permission. They were already moving, and the battle that followed wouldn't be fought in space, it would be fought in spirit, in culture, in Willa, and Earth was just getting started. They came expecting resistance in the form of missiles and metal, but what met them was something far more dangerous: a belief, not blind nationalism, not doctrine-driven warfare, something older, wilder, a species with nothing left to prove and everything left to protect, a people who had been underestimated one too many times and had learned to survive by turning their stories into shields. When the Council's command vessel finally descended within Earth's upper orbit, its atmosphere scanning sensors were bombarded not by strategic targeting systems but by thousands of millions of human-generated signals. Some were decoys, others were poetry. One was a mother's voice reciting a bedtime story, another was a protest chant from a past revolution, and layered beneath it all was a rising global rhythm, a single audio pulse, a heartbeat recorded from different parts of the planet and merged into one continuous signal. Earth's heartbeat. The Council called it interference, but Kraysk knew better. It was a declaration. This wasn't just defense, this was identity, and that terrified the Council more than any weapon. As the warships loomed, some in the Council demanded planetary sterilization, a quick purge, clean and precise, but others hesitated. The footage from Kraysk's beacon had not only spread across Earth, it had leaked into the deep diplomatic channels of other species, and now, from across the galaxy, whispers were rising, of a planet that changed an observer, of a culture that turned empathy into rebellion, of a species that had no fleet, no council seat, a broken bar but heart. Back on the ground, humans didn't hide, they performed. Artists painted murals on ruins, children staged plays reenacting Kraysk's first rescue, a band in Tokyo played orchestral renditions of alien data signals, turning council-coded language into music. People wrote stories where Earth survived, where the alien wasn't the threat but the one who changed everything. Kraysk stood in the center of it. He didn't command, he didn't lead, he simply watched, and in doing so, understood the truth. Humanity didn't fight like other civilizations. They didn't destroy to win. They inspired. A poet from Nairobi wrote a single line that spread faster than any virus: "We are not the oldest, we are not the strongest, but we remember." And they did. They remembered every tyrant they had overthrown, every dark age they had crawled out from, every scar etched into the bones of their nations. They had no unity of species, but they had unity of will. In the refugee sectors of war-torn cities, people stood on rooftops with mirrors, flashing coded light toward orbit, not in desperation, but in defiance. In the Arctic, researchers lit flares into the sky to create auroras so bright, the Council drones had to divert flight paths. And in space, aboard aging human satellites and scavenged orbital debris, automated eye systems looped one sentence in thousands of languages. "We're still here." One Council fleet captain looked at the data stream, confused. "They have no central command," she whispered. "No singular defense authority." "How are they coordinating?" "They're not," her second-in-command answered. "They're feeling." That was when the Council realized Earth wasn't reacting from fear. It was channeling it, turning survival into performance art, turning death into rhythm, turning defiance into a global ritual. Kraysk walked through a marketplace where a man sold paintings of imagined alien gods falling in love with human children. A woman sang opera to nobody from the broken steps of a courthouse. A child offered him a flower, saying, "I heard you save people. This helps with fear." He took the flower, and for the first time, he cried, not because of sadness, but because this species, this messy, chaotic, illogical species, was winning a war not by forcing a broken bar but by reminding the galaxy what it meant to be alive. The Council could burn cities, they could flatten infrastructure, but they couldn't erase soul, and soul was Earth's final weapon. It lived in song, in flame, in story, in stubbornness, in a gaze held too long, in laughter in the face of extinction, and it pulsed louder every day. The council hesitated, because Earth had made the choice. They would not go quietly, they would not beg, they would not kneel, they would remember. And soon, the galaxy would too. The signal didn't stop at Earth. What started as one defiant broadcast from a rogue observer spiraled across the galactic lattice like a spark thrown into dry wind. At first, only a few heard it, a small outposts on the rim, fringe colonies where news arrived late and doubt lingered longer. But then came the stories, unfiltered, raw, from Earth itself. The Galactic Council's highest encryption cracked not by force, but by feeling. The emotional resonance embedded in Kraysk's transmission couldn't be firewalled. It echoed in frequencies the Council's eye had no protocol for. Grief, joy, wonder. The algorithm stuttered. The firewall buckled. And for the first time in living memory, the truth leaked past the control gates. They saw it, a human child pressing their hand to Kraysk's armor and whispering, "Don't go." A group of old men building a signal tower from junk parts with no blueprint, just belief. Footage of the alien ship visible in Earth's sky, a broken bar and the humans below dancing. The galaxy, long ruled by silence and submission, gasped. Civilizations that once trembled before the Council's shadow paused to listen. The Dravoth, the Archivesa species thought extinct, to open dormant communication lines to play the Earth signal on loop. The Martin Cloud traders, long neutral, painted Earth's sun on their hulls, and the Ovrine, bitter veterans of an ancient extermination, sent one message to the Council chamber: "You warned us about Earth, you were right to fear it, but you told us the wrong reason." For centuries, the Council maintained order by branding emotion as weakness. But now emotion was spreading. An art collective and the moons of Acerus began painting scenes from Kraysk's memory as visuals extracted from the emotional compression in his original signal. They displayed a burning violin, a smile beneath rubble, a starship cloaked in rain. Tourists came in silence, then in thousands. In the city planet of Kacheron, a faction of Council diplomats staged a walkout. "We can't call them savages anymore," one delegate whispered to his aide. "They're more civilized than we ever were." Panic brewed behind Council doors. Control was unraveling, and not from violence, but from meaning. From art, story, song. Earth had done what no fleet ever could. It made the galaxy feel. And yet, the Council's core refused to yield. They saw the shift, but believed they could outlast it. "Suppress the wave," one strategist ordered. "We've silenced worse." But the wave wasn't digital. It wasn't centralized. It was human. In one corner of the spiral arm, a rebel group known as the Charon Havens built a temple to Earth, not as worship, but as memory. Inside its walls were screens looping the words Kraysk spoke before he vanished. "The weapon isn't what they build, it's who they become when you try to break them." Meanwhile, Earth was changing too. Humans had seen their reach now. They weren't just defending anymore. They were connecting, using the galactic net to speak to species who had never heard an unsanctioned truth. Earth became a signal tower, a flame in the dark, a proof that the Council's hold was not eternal. On the edge of Jupiter's orbit, a Northern scout ship blinked its running lights in Earth's direction, a coded gesture of respect. In orbit, Kraysk stood aboard an old atmospheric shuttle, surrounded by human engineers modifying old tech with newer dreams. They didn't speak Council language, but they listened to him with something the Council had never offered: trust. He looked out the viewport at Earth's globe, still radiating in defiance, and said quietly, "You've done what I never could. You made them question." And down on the surface, humans kept doing what they did best: not conquering, not commanding, but creating. A filmmaker in Istanbul made a short film about Kraysk's story. No budget, just heart. It went viral in 12 systems. A child in Brazil created a toy model of the alien dropship, but covered it in stickers that read, "Friend." A former military pilot formed an open resistance network called Signal 43A, named after the exact second the world realized Kraysk wasn't an enemy. And all across the stars, something ancient stirred. Species who had lived in fear for generations now remembered something long buried: hope. The Galactic Council's reach hadn't just been challenged, it had been pierced, not by a super weapon, not by a fleet, but by a story. And now, With the galaxy listening, a broken bar, the final move was Earth to make. The Council had no more illusions left. Every attempt to smother Earth's signal had failed. Every protocol that once silenced rebellions had collapsed. Civilizations they once kept in line with fear had begun asking dangerous questions, not about power, not about control, but about truth. And at the center of this storm, standing quietly at the edge of Earth's atmosphere, was the one they had sent to observe, now preparing to confront the very order that had forged him. Kraysk stood inside the relic chamber aboard Earth's final orbiting defense ring, a station long decommissioned, now brought back online by rogue engineers, scavenged code, and sheer will. Around him blinked ancient displays interfaced with human tech. Behind him, a team of civilians stood in silence. No uniforms, no ranks, just faces lit by courage. In his hands was a device older than most stars, the override prism, meant only for Council use. If activated, it could broadcast a single signal strong enough to overwrite every Council channel in known space. Not a weapon, not a hack, a truth bomb. And they had minutes before the Council fleet entered full strike alignment. Below, the world held its breath, not out of fear but unity. No one told the people of Earth to stop, but factories halted, traffic froze, fires burned unattended, and yet a broken bar there was peace. Billions of eyes watched the sky. Some prayed, others whispered to the stars, but they were waiting for him, the one they now called the Witness. Council Command sent one final transmission: surrender and return. The experiment has ended. There was no emotion in the message, no threat, just the certainty of supremacy. Kraysk listened and did not answer. Instead, he stepped forward, placed the override prism on the command node, and spoke to Earth, to the galaxy, to every species that had been made to kneel. I was built to observe, but I've seen enough. The station trembled as the prism activated. A hum filled the void, not static or resonance, the same kind of frequency embedded in every heartbeat, every scream, every lullaby shared between survivors in the shattered world. One by one, across the stars, the prism's message reached the Council's listening posts. And what they heard wasn't rebellion, it was choice. The voice of a species that had been offered nothing, endured everything, and chosen to still it arise. The signal wasn't polished, it wasn't engineered, it was humanity. Montages of lives, of lovers separated by war reuniting in broken streets, of children learning to laugh after loss, of artists turning bombed ruins into stained glass, of people flawed, furious, forgiven and choosing not to become monsters in the dark. And behind it all, Kraysk's voice. They didn't become powerful because of technology. They became powerful because they felt everything and still chose to hope, to protect, to create. If that threatens you, a broken bar, then maybe it's time you feared them. There was silence in the Council chambers. One by one, monitors across the fleet went dark. Ships halted mid-descent, drones deactivated, confused by contradictory directives. 1,000 fleets stood frozen between action and uncertainty. And then something happened the Council had never prepared for. A single Council ship, stationed above a colony on the rim, deactivated its weapons and turned away. Then another, then a dozen more. And far below, Earth exhaled. No one cheered, not yet, because victory was not the end. The Council wasn't defeated, but they had been shaken. Their myth had cracked, their silence had broken. The message had landed. Kraysk stepped back from the console. His armor flickered, sparks danced along his arms. He had given too much of himself. The energy output had ruptured his internal matrix. His systems were failing. Slowly, irreversibly, one of the engineers moved to catch him. But he raised a hand. No, he said, a flicker of static in his voice. Let me see it. He turned toward Earth. The clouds parted below. The sun bled gold across oceans. Cities glowed like circuitry. Fires, gardens, ruins, monuments all in one frame. And he smiled. This was never about war, he whispered. It was always about worth. He sat down, leaning against the cold panel wall, and felt the weight of centuries lift. Not because the fight was over, but because someone, somewhere, would carry the story forward. In the sky above, the Council ships waited, but for now a broken bar they didn't strike. And far away, across the stars, a child from a forgotten moon watched the signal on a cracked tablet and asked, Could we be like them too? Because now they knew Earth was never alone. It was just the first to remind the galaxy that hearts, not weapons, shape destiny. And once truth echo as a broken bar, it never dies. The end of one story, the beginning of countless others.